Hey everyone, in today's video, I wanted to talk about the toxicity of flexing culture in K-pop. As a lot of you may already know, flexing means showing off wealth and luxury. Usually we see this with celebrities and influencers through the brands they wear or advertise, and while it can make idols look super successful, I believe it can also be problematic. Before we get into it, however, since we are talking about flexing, if any of you feel like flexing a bit today and helping me out in the process, you can do so by liking this video if you enjoyed it and subscribing to my channel. And if you're feeling really flexy, maybe even help support the channel by pressing that super thanks button. I really appreciate you all, and let's get into it. Flexing culture adds a layer of glamour and excitement to K-pop. It makes K-pop idols seem that much more superior, untouchable, more of a celebrity. But it also brings forward significant issues that need to be addressed, and that is what I'll be doing today. I just need to start off by saying that this is definitely not a problem that is because of idols alone. It is a combination of idols, their industry, and the brands that they work with. So do keep in mind that I'm not making this video to hate on idols specifically, because I do understand that a lot of them are just following the herd and are a result of their industry. So, what is flexing culture in K-pop? As someone who has followed K-pop through the rise of 3 generations now, I've seen a lot of change, and one I've definitely noticed since the popularization of K-pop in the West is the introduction and normalization of flexing in K-pop. A simple example that comes to mind is stage outfits that have gone from focusing more on style or cohesion to now brands. And while there could be several theories for this, first, obviously the popularity of groups like BTS, who basically started as a hip-hop group, and Blackpink, a group that borrows from hip-hop culture and is under a hip-hop company. The roots of flexing culture can be traced back to hip-hop, where showcasing wealth and success through material possessions is a common theme. It is defined by the attitude of showing off power and status, and since K-pop borrows heavily from hip-hop, not just in music and dance, but also in lifestyle and imagery, this integration has led K-pop idols to adopt similar behaviors, emphasizing designer brands, expensive cars, and lavish lifestyles. And don't get me wrong, flexing in itself is not wrong, and I do not mean to insinuate that at all. At the core of it, flexing for rappers is meant to show off their hard work and journey, as they usually point out their rough upbringing or the way society tends to push black people down. And despite these disparities, these rappers have found fame, success, and pleasing lifestyles, and I think that is definitely something to boast about. When flexing culture goes awry is when we leave the part about one's origins and roots behind and focus just on the materialistic aspects, which is usually how we see it present itself in K-pop. Basically, when I say flexing culture can be problematic, the following example is not the kind of flexing I'm referring to. An example of the kind of flexing that I think is honestly unproblematic and in my opinion a lot more genuine, or at least a lot less superficial, is seen in many BTS lyrics. And yeah, you may call me biased, but I can't change facts, I'm just presenting them. When flexing, BTS often bring up their haters that preyed on their downfall, or the companies that actively tried to push them down, juxtaposing this with their achievements. Usually not monetary, but those that reflect their rise in the music industry. For example, their awards or Billboard #1s. Alternatively, they also flex their work ethic, a non-material possession that has obviously in turn brought BTS a lot of success and material possessions. But despite that, they choose to flex the means to the product as opposed to the product itself. Basically, BTS tend to use flexing as a way to reflect on their humble beginnings instead of focusing just on their present wealth, which could come off shallow if they didn't paint the whole picture. If BTS didn't allude to their past in their songs and instead just flexed their huge apartments and even huger net worths, it would come off very superficial. On the other hand, an example of flexing that can be problematic is songs where brands are seemingly name-dropped or flexed. While I'm sure a lot of these artists have also definitely worked hard to be in these brands, their lyrics really just skip over all of that, instead just focusing on flexing their money, literally, or the brands they wear, and because of the lack of context, all we see is rich people flexing their money, which comes off very shallow, especially when some of these idols have kind of always been rich, so we're just getting insulted at this point. I understand that a lot of these lyrics could be written with the intention of being targeted towards haters, but Money is a good example of how lack of context, that is Lisa's hard work, her rise, or the song being to haters, is all omitted, and instead we have about 3 minutes of her talking about how rich she is, which isn't the move in my opinion. Flexing of this kind can set unrealistic standards for both fans and other idols. When K-pop stars constantly showcase these high-end luxuries, it creates a perception that such extravagance is normal and attainable and something to desire, which, while it might be, is definitely not entirely ethical. This can lead to fans feeling pressured to emulate these lifestyles, even if it is beyond their financial means. Young and impressionable fans are particularly vulnerable, as they may feel inadequate or dissatisfied with their own lives in comparison and can chase lifestyles that we all know can be pretty problematic just for the satisfaction of gaining materialistic wealth. And I really am trying not to sound like a party pooper, and at the base level, flexing doesn't seem like a big deal, but you definitely see its effects trickle down into the fandoms and their behaviors, and we'll talk about that more. But even then, the argument can be made that these artists can show off their wealth. What's the issue? And I'd usually agree, but post-2019, my opinions did change drastically. The display of wealth can be particularly tone-deaf in times of economic hardship. During the many people around the world faced financial difficulties, including job losses, reduced incomes, even losing their primary moneymakers, while artists seemingly continued living lavish lifestyles in their large houses and even traveling, including K-pop idols who were seen jet-setting during the pandemic while many couldn't even see their loved ones to say goodbye. You can say that that's not the idol's fault, and we just live in a society where the rich benefit while the poor get poorer. But in this context, seeing idols flaunt their wealth can seem just very insensitive and disconnected from the struggles of their audience, especially considering that this is the audience that made them rich in the first place. And trust me, I know that that is not what the writer's intentions were, and they were just continuing on with the trend of flexing. It is just the lack of understanding for the reality of a lot of people in lower income communities that comes off a bit jarring. This disparity can lead to a feeling of alienation among fans who may see their idols as out of touch with reality, or in some fans' case, make them really tone deaf to the literal social class that they may even belong to. I have definitely seen way too many examples of this neoclassism, as I call it, happening in K-pop, where people seemingly forget their own financial status and vicariously live through idols, which makes them feel like they have good enough footing to go off on rants about the poor peasants. I want to talk about this blindness towards one's own financial status with 2 points. The first is that a lot of fans see these extravagant lifestyles and mistake themselves to be poor when they could be completely financially stable. When observing celebrities, we lose touch with reality and the fact that if you have a roof over your head, food on your plate, and a somewhat stable life, you are one of the very lucky few, especially post you-know-what. While it is amazing to look up to these extravagant lifestyles and make it your goal, it is also very, very essential to stop once in a while and be grateful for what you have, but only seeing what you don't have really makes that difficult. Secondly, it makes fans really out of touch. And an example of this is a tweet I saw where there was an ongoing fan war between onces and blanks, which, what's new? But a specific reply that I did want to mention because it pertains to what I'm discussing is that someone was basically comparing an outfit that a Twice member was wearing that cost around $500 and comparing it to an outfit that a Blackpink member wore that cost around $5,000. And they used this as a drag, calling the Twice member the Walmart version, but you do realize that $500 for an outfit is still an insane amount of money for literal clothes. It's fabric. How out of touch do you have to be to think in any situation that that is firstly cheap and secondly something to mock? And if I'm judging right based on the replier's maturity level, they'd probably need to ask their mom before spending even $50, but being online and being so tuned into flex culture and all of these brand deals that play K-pop made them think that $500 for an outfit is cheap. For real, if someone came up to me and said they spent $5,000 for an outfit, I'd say they got majorly ripped off. And I understand that they are celebrities, and so their outfits are just gonna cost more because they come from these designer brands, which don't even get me started on the ick I get from these brands. I mean, truthfully speaking, you are being charged for the brand name and not the product, but the worst part is that the people that actually made your clothes probably don't even make minimum wage, which brings me to the next point of why I find flex culture to be problematic: promoting consumerism. Flexing culture heavily promotes consumerism and materialism. Idols often collaborate with luxury brands, turning their lifestyles into marketing tools, which can create a cycle where fans are encouraged to buy expensive products to feel closer to their faves. The constant push for luxury items can lead to unnecessary spending and financial strain, especially among younger fans who may not have the means to afford such items. A good example, or I guess a bad example of this, is ARMYs, who are known to sell out products they see around BTS, and while that may seem cool, it's honestly just excessive consumerism for the sake of it. A lot of you may buy products that you see your faves use, when in reality you probably don't even need it, or worse, it's not even meant for you. And in doing so, you could be selling out products which companies then mark up for people who actually do need these products, or worse, be supporting companies or people that are not entirely ethical. An example that comes to mind is Jennie of Blackpink, who is often seen wearing Alexander Wang. If you didn't know, Alexander Wang was accused by several models of sexual assault back in 2020. There were allegations of drugging, groping, etc. of several male models and trans women. And while he initially denied them and even said he'd hold the accusers accountable, he did later apologize on Instagram, which I don't know about you, but sir, you aren't being cancelled for a shady tweet, and Instagram apology is just not gonna cut it. And I am in no way insinuating that all bling support Wang. In fact, a lot were worried about Jennie when they saw him around her, but there are others. And the point is, you can't expect a random bling to know that, and if they're just a fan of Jennie and want to buy the things that she does, and they can afford it, they will, and they have, which means that a lot of blings unknowingly or even knowingly supported and funded a horrible person. And these things can happen without an idol's knowledge. Idols could buy a certain brand if they like a piece or an item when they're out shopping, and you cannot necessarily expect them to bust out Wikipedia to search up each company's past and endorsements. Fans, however, will see these items and without a second thought will sell out these brands regardless of if they like the product or not, which creates this vicious cycle of consumerism and unnecessary pollution, especially when it comes to the purchase of excessive clothes or unethically produced clothes. Which brings me to my next point, which is designer brands and their endorsements with K-pop idols. I originally wanted to make a whole separate video on how the whole designer brand, fashion show, and fashion event thing has gone way too far in K-pop and how it literally makes K-pop fans even more toxic, which I could still do if you're interested, but for now, keep in mind that however luxurious and elite these brands may set themselves up to look, a lot of them are unethical and really shady. K-pop idols often serve as trendsetters and are thus appointed by these high-end designer brands to endorse them, which enhances idols' own status and influence while simultaneously promoting these brands to their fan bases. But a lot of these endorsements give me just the ickiest feelings, and I'll tell you why. BTS and Blackpink have both talked about climate change and SDGs, yet both groups collaborated with brands like Dior, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Celine, YSL, etc. that are doing very little to reduce their carbon footprint. Best case scenario is that some of these companies are starting to adopt ethical practices, but newsflash, these aren't small businesses. They have a huge amount of money and resources, and this very slow adoption of ethical practices should be fully underway already. So while I understand that being a celebrity means you have to spend a lot of your days in designer wear, it also makes me feel really disappointed that idols promote good ideas and positive change on one hand, while collaborating with companies that do the exact opposite. And fans will then contribute to this, not doing their own research and funding companies that at the very least are harmful to the planet, and the most are involved in shady shit from unethical work practices to unfair wages and mistreatment. Idols have immense influence and their endorsements carry weight. While they may have limited control over the business practices of the brands they endorse, they do have the power to choose which brands they associate with. By aligning themselves with more ethical and sustainable brands, idols could drive positive change within the industry. So basically, flexing culture, as it's supposed to be, is a celebration of perseverance and hard work, but through its various adoptions can become a sort of shallow display of wealth and inapt representation of modern classism. And it also makes fans think it's normal to mock financial status and also live in a delusion that extreme wealth is the norm. While idols adopt flexing in their songs to represent aspects of hip-hop culture, there are definitely right and wrong ways of doing so. And if the message of your song is just flexing that you're rich, especially in a post-pandemic world, it comes off very tone-deaf and shallow to the struggles of literally everyone else who isn't super rich. Moreover, by promoting different brands and being heavily involved with them, idols inadvertently promote consumerism and the support of unethical people, brands, and practices. It's a weird way of the rich making the rich richer while mocking the poor who made them rich. Now, isn't that such a fun sight? And that is all for this video, and just to reiterate, a lot of you could assume that I'm being kind of a hard ass about this and that it isn't a big deal, but when you face financial hardships and live as a regular person, working every day just to survive, and then hear rich people diss you for seemingly just trying and existing, it can get pretty fucking annoying. And while at the base level these things may seem small, they contribute heavily to bigger issues like capitalism, classism, consumerism, and even harming the planet. So yeah, maybe I'm being a hard ass, but hey, it's my video. And if you enjoyed it or agreed, please show me support by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing. Let's get me some money so that in a few years I can in turn flex on you.